Last week on Personal Testimonies, Chapter 2, Episode 2, We Have a Heart.
Like, and still, I don't know if it was from the shock or everything that was going on. I wasn't worried. Like, I wasn't scared. I was just laying there. We were all talking and stuff like that. The surgeon came out. We got to meet with the surgeon who was going to do the transplant. And he was assured that everything was going to be good. Everything was going to be great. And I sat there for probably about 15, 20 minutes, and then they wheeled me into the operating room.
And that is where we're going to stop. And that is where we begin. Episode number 3, Chapter 2, The Second Heart Transplant. Personal Testimonies starts right now.
This is a special primetime edition. Have faith. Let it begin, and Endless Hope Inc. presents a new series entitled Personal Testimonies. Here is your host, Angel Santana, and special co-host, Clinton Knapp.
Personal Testimonies is back on the air. We're not going to make you wait. We left off where Clinton was being wheeled in to have his second heart transplant. Ladies and gentlemen, we call him the MMC. I just made that up today. And that's Miracle Man Clinton. Clinton, welcome back. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Good evening. How are you? It feels great to be back. So they wheeled me into the operating. Again, it was quick, I don't want to say quick procedure, but quick process getting set up. I moved from one bed to another. I laid back. They started talking to me about anesthesia, asking questions, whether, like, if I'd lose teeth and, dentures or anything like that, they could come out. So I answered all the questions. And then as the doctor was putting in the IV, we were talking, and next thing I know, I'm sleeping. This is where, for me, it's just like nap time. For everybody else, it's worry time. All the families out in the waiting room. They're waiting because this is a long process. I'm out, and while I'm out, they're prepping me to remove my heart and to put the new heart in. But they can't start to remove my heart until the new heart has already been removed and is there. So, which is information that no one knows other than the doctors. They don't know, no one to me, my family knows where it's coming from, how long it's going to take to get there. So from what was explained to me afterwards is the doctors came out about 4:30 in the morning and said that they were starting the procedure. So at 4:30 a.m. is when they started to open me up. Again, it's my second transplant, so it's a little bit more difficult because there's already wires in place from holding the rib cage together from the first procedure, scar tissue that they need to cut through and all that stuff.
Do you mind if I ask you a quick question? I know I don't mean to interrupt you, but maybe it's just somebody like who's had back surgery. My question to you is, forgive me if this is too graphic. They had to recut you in the same. Is it the same opening from the last surgery? Is that?
So yeah, they went right on top of the old scar, and so primarily, like, if you were to look at me now, it wouldn't be two lines. It would just be one line. The only difference is now there's a couple more other scars, which I'll get into as I tell that part of the story. So yeah, right down the same scar. They open me up. They, remove all the tissue and all of that stuff. Then they get to the rib cage. At that point, they cut all the wires because there's 6 wires holding me together, my rib cage together at that point in time. They removed those, recut the rib cage open, the sternum, and they do what they do. The doctor steps in, he starts to dissect the heart however he has to get the old one out so he can get the new one in. So from that point, like I said, it was a long procedure. They say it's usually an 11, 12-hour procedure, sometimes a little shorter, depending on the surgeon. My surgeon has done this several times. He's actually a very great surgeon. He's actually, I wish I could say his name because he's renowned on the East Coast for several serious accomplishments when it comes to heart transplant.
And for the record, we are going to do our very best to reach out from you and I to see whether or not we can get them on the show. So hold on to your hats
Absolutely.
because we're going to try to get those names because I think it is well deserved. I have a question for you. I know that you're trying to relive this moment, and I appreciate you doing that because it's not easy. You said it's a long procedure, and you just gave a couple of hints as to how long. Obviously, for you, it's a blink. For anybody
Yeah.
who's had a surgery, your lights go, your lights go out, but then you open your eyes and X amount of hours go by. So my first
Yeah.
question to you, and then I'll let you continue. So just answer and keep going is was the planned amount of time, well, actually, what is the average according to what they say, average time that they said it was going to be, and what was the outcome, what was the total amount of hours?
8 to 12 hours, and then I believe it was about 10, somewhere between 8 and 10. Now, as you mentioned, yes, when you're going for a procedure, it's a blink of an eye. But for me, this time it wasn't a blink of an eye because for this time it was different because again, it's my second transplant, so it was a re-op. So what normally would have taken 8 to 12 hours, and then you go into recovery and you wake up. Some people wake up the same day. Some people wake up the next day. Usually the same day. Usually in a few hours they wake you up. They start to wake you up. But for me, they left me open. So my chest was left open. I went from operating room to the CTICU, and they had to leave my chest open because they weren't sure. They didn't want to close me up and then have to go back in for anything and then reopen me. So they just left me open with some type of sterile film that they put over top. So I went back to the CTICU with two open wounds, the sternum and then one on the right shoulder where they had the bypass because I was on bypass. And for me, it was a 4 day nap. I was out for 4 days. I
Wow.
came out of surgery Thursday evening. I went in early Thursday morning, 2:30 in the morning. I came out Thursday afternoon, evening. Friday, I went back to have my chest closed up and everything like that because everything was fine. And then I didn't officially wake up until Sunday. I mean, they woke me up every 12 hours during shift change to make sure that there was no issues, that didn't have a stroke or anything like that. But I didn't officially wake up until Sunday.
So, question:
Yeah.
you had come out of the surgery, right? They
Yep.
leave you open. I would presume. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Because it's your second heart transplant, that is considered that is protocol.
Yes.
Okay, so they left you open. Obviously, they covered you up, but it was your wounds were open in case they had to go back in. So here's my follow up question to that is: you said you had a 4 day nap, but you also said that on occasion they did wake you up. Do you recall at any point in time? I know that when I had spinal surgery, they told me that if they didn't physically tell me that they're going to wake me up, I wouldn't have any recollection of that. I do recall being woken up on my end for them to wiggle my toes when they inserted metal rods. So, do you recall any of those wake ups?
Yes, I do. I recall each and every one of them. During each wake up, I remember the nurses asking me to squeeze their hands, wiggle my toes, wiggle my fingers, stuff like that, so they could make sure that there was nothing neurologically wrong. Again, like I didn't have a stroke or anything. Also, during that same time, my wife was there and she would have me do little tests like squeeze my hand once to say yes, squeeze it twice to say no, stuff like that. I wasn't awake for long. It was literally 2, 3 minutes and then right back out. They sedated me and sent me back to sleep. But that was every 12 hours until I woke up officially on Sunday. When I officially woke up, it was a little bit of a struggle. When you're under sedation for so long, I didn't expect it. I mean, they kind of warned me a little bit, but I didn't know too much of what was exactly going to happen. But when you're under for so long, you experience some crazy things. Like I started to feel like I was awake all the time and things were happening, but they weren't really happening. I was sleeping and it was just dreams. And when I woke up, when I first officially woke up on Sunday, I thought those dreams were real. And it took me a day or two to when for the sedation to wear off and stuff like that for me to realize that they weren't real. It was just dreams that I was having, and none of it was real.
Can
Um,
you elaborate on those dreams? Are you allowed to share that? Do you feel comfortable sharing that? Or were they
I
more like
can,
hallucinations? What was
I
happening?
can. Some of I want to say yes, hallucinations, but then some of them were. It was kind of like I recalled an incident that would happen, and then my brain would form a story around it. So, like, for example, one of them was, you see all the time commercials on TV for like Ozempic and stuff like that, and how those commercials have certain side effects. So one of the dreams that I had was that I was hurt. I was in the position that I was in, and that I couldn't see or speak because of the side effects of these medications, and that I was actually removed from the hospital and taken to a different facility where they were running tests and stuff like that. Yeah, it gets a little crazy. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but
No, I
most
get it, and
people
I
probably
appreciate you
think
giving
that
the
I'm nuts.
example, and I will be here to first to tell you that what he's talking about is actually accurate. And real quick, 10 seconds. When I had my back surgery, and I was under a lot myself. I dreamt that I was on a boat. Somebody punched me, and I fell off the boat, and
Nice.
all of a sudden the water froze up to my neck, and then I actually woke up thinking I was drowning. So I can relate to Clinton, that hallucinations can occur. There's a lot of side effects that do happen. While we're waiting for Clinton to gather his thoughts, I want to remind each and every one of you, this is just a few seconds as we're kind of like readjusting microphones, that personal testimonies will continue on for the next couple of Wednesdays as we continue to tell the story of Clinton Knapp's second heart transplant. But we want to remind each and every one of you, as we're waiting for the adjustments of the microphones, that the personal testimonies from the original chapter 1 will also integrate with chapter 2. So I just want everybody to know that as we're readjusting our microphones. But yes, back to what your story was. Thank you for elaborating on the hallucinations.
Problem.
Let's get past that. But yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. So again, so after a couple of days, after like the second day, and I was fully off the anesthesia and it wore off and everything like that, I was able to distinguish real from fiction, and there was a lot of fiction. One of the things that did occur is, when I did wake up, I woke up in such a frantic state that I reached out to pull the breathing tube out, but at the same time I was talking. So because I was talking and the breathing tube was in, the nurses were trying to restrain me from pulling it out because you can hurt yourself. You can destroy your esophagus and stuff like that, and some people get hurt that they can't ever talk or anything like that again. But because I was doing some screaming and yelling, because because of the hallucinations, I felt like I was in danger. So I was screaming and yelling because I was in fear, when in all actuality, the nurses were helping me. So I started to resist and started to fight. So they had to hold me down. They had to restrain me for a few minutes to get me to calm down. But from talking, the actual breathing tube popped out on its own. And at that point, I have nothing there to. So now they're just like, okay, they let me go, and I was able to calm myself down by talking to one of the other nurses and stuff like that. And everything, she cleared everything up. She explained to me how she had explained to me that I had been to sleep for 4 days and stuff like that, which I was unaware. And I, like I said, I moved on. So now I have family coming and visiting me. The wife and my mother came in first, and then, I spent some time with them, and then they rotated out and stuff like that. Within a few hours, I want to say 2 to 4 hours, I was able to ask the nurse, like, how long did I need to be in bed before I could get out of bed and sit into a chair? Because even though I was asleep for 4 days and I didn't know it or whatever, your body feels it. So now my body is like, my back is killing me. I'm restless. So the nurse was like, we can get you out of bed now. We just got to make some room, because the room I was in had a lot of machines. I have machines that are checking the input, the output of all the pressures of my heart, the new heart and stuff like that. Unfortunately, at the time, I was having some issue breathing. So I was on very heavy oxygen, because the new heart is a lot bigger than what my old heart was. So it was actually protruding into the areas of the lungs. So my left lung was actually somewhat, what's the word they use besides collapsed.
The heart was so big that was it collapsing the lungs?
It collapsed. It was collapsing the left lung. So I
Wow.
wasn't able to breathe. So I was on high flow oxygen for a while until I could build it up. I stayed in the chair for, now this is Sunday when I woke up. Sunday, six, six, this Friday, the ninth. March 9th, when I woke up, was Sunday. So I woke up. Now I'm up. I'm in a chair. I just slept for 4 days. I didn't sleep for 36 and a half hours, 38 hours almost. I just sat in the chair watching TV, fooling around on my laptop, binge watching some shows on Netflix on my laptop.
And you still
Um,
had time to text me happy birthday. God bless you for that one.
yes, I did. Yes, I did. I definitely did. Yeah, I made sure I reached out to a lot of people to let everybody know that I was awake and I was okay and that I was ready to get back to life. They they cleared me for ice chips, and then the nurse came. Actually, one of the head nurses from the floor came in and was like, "We're gonna see if we can get you cleared for liquids, but you got to go slow." I said, "All right." I said, "Because I'm hungry. I didn't eat in almost 5 days. I'm hungry." So they came in. She said, here's a cup of water. She said, if you can drink this and not choke or anything like that, then we can clear you for clear liquids." And I said, all right, cool. I said, drink it straight or like, she said, no, 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 go slow. So I said, okay. So I took the cup, small cup. I want to say probably a 4 ounce cup. And I was so thirsty. I actually chugged it. And it felt, she asked me afterwards, she's like, how do you feel? I said, amazing. I said, that was probably the best cup of water I've ever had in my life. Then a little bit later, now this is obviously Monday. I don't think I mentioned that, but this is Monday. So then a little bit later on in the late afternoon, early evening, she came in and she handed me a fruit cup, diced pears. I believe it was diced pears. And she said, if you can eat this and you're all right, then we can clear you for food. And I said, you mean like regular food, like whole food, or you mean like puree? She's like, no, whole food, like hamburger, hot dog or something. Well, she did not hot dog, but hamburger or something like that. So I said, all right, cool. I ate it. Everything was good. It felt a little soft, but wasn't like hard pears. They were soft, but I ate it. Everything went fine. So then they cleared me and they brought me up a meal for dinner. And
All right, everybody's gonna want to know, man. What did you eat?
so I didn't order it because they weren't sure if I was going to be cleared, but they brought me up that night. It was salmon, see, Mediterranean salmon over cilantro rice and roasted potatoes or sweet potatoes, sweet potato wedges. And I know everybody's thinking hospital food, ugh. But let me tell you something. This hospital food, the whole stay I was there, I never had a bad meal. The only thing horrible that they sent me was the chickpeas. I hate chickpeas. But other than that, the food down there was amazing.
All
Um,
right, so for the record, no chickpeas anymore at this hospital.
no, no. But you know what? I ate them. I actually added them to my chicken noodle soup, and I ate them because they told me I needed to eat them. My fiber. I said, all right. I'll eat 'em." So now it's just a waiting game. Now it's how long before this can come off. Because I had 4 chest tubes as opposed to the first time I had 2. But this time when I went in, I had a lot more fluid build up. I was retaining water, and I had a lot of water weight. I was almost, from what they said, I was almost 300 pounds. I didn't realize that I was that big. I thought scale at home told me I was way less, but apparently that scale was lying to me because it was stroking my ego.
Yeah. When you say water, where were you retaining the water? Where? What do you mean, like?
So there was a lot on my chest, and then my legs. My legs were really, really big, especially on the left side, because the left side is where your heart is, so that's where everything's more affected when you're in heart failure. But like my ankles were probably like 4 or 5 times the size that I mean, if you'd see my ankles like now, I look like a walking skeleton compared to what I looked like when I walked into that hospital that night. So when after transplant, when they weighed me, I was down to 276 from close to 300. So almost 25 pounds of water and fluid. So that was a good accomplishment. So yeah, I had 4 chest tubes now because there was more fluid to remove, stuff like that, as opposed to the first time I only had 2. But I also had the pacemaker. Those wires are run through your chest and into the heart. I also had a Foley to pee, and then EKG wires and IV for this, and I had a IV in my left wrist, an IV in my right forearm, and then the J line in my neck, so they can check all my pressures and stuff like that, and certain medications needed to go through there and stuff like that. So I had wires and tubes everywhere. Now Tuesday, occupational therapy comes in. She comes in. She has me do little things, and then she tells me things that I should do, like move my arms constantly, move my fingers, wiggle my toes, my feet, stuff like that, lift my legs, stuff. So I'm like, all right. She says, and these are all things you can do from the chair. So then she leaves, and shortly after, physical therapist comes in, and he gets me up, and we do some standing for a few seconds, and then he asks me how I feel, and I said I feel great, and he says okay. He says let's try walking in place, and I said let's try walking down the hall, and he says I think you're moving a little too fast, and I said listen. I told him the same thing I told my other doctor. I wouldn't tell you I could do it if I can't. And we walked to the end of the hall. And for the first time in nearly a week, I was able to look outside the window and see it wasn't the best day. It was a gloomy day, and I got to see another building, but I also got to see a bird and sunlight. You know what I mean? I was in a room where I had no windows, and the only thing I could see was the patient across the hall, the nurses and doctors running up and down the hall. I couldn't see anything. So it felt great. We walked to the end of the hall. I looked out the window, and then we went back to the room. And he
I'm
was
laughing
impressed.
because the reason why we're laughing is because if you haven't heard chapter one, this is not this is not normal. This is Clinton at his best, being stubborn in a good way. And you got to understand. You got to go back to chapter one to understand.
Yeah, definitely. Some of this is kind of repetitive from chapter one, but it makes for a good time, because some people you're probably listening, and you're like sad, but it'll help bring up your spirits because it's not all bad. So now it's kind of the same thing every day for the next few days. I mean, with the exception of the my biggest hurdle was the oxygen, was breathing. They would reduce the medications that there was certain medications that I was on to help the body so that I could breathe. Like I forget the name, but one of them was like epinephrine, so I had to be on that, and then I had to be on this other medication. They were giving it to me with the oxygen. It was like nitrogen or something like that
How long
to
did it
help
take for them
boost.
to take the fluid? Like you said, it was fluid, right?
Yes.
So, and the breathing. How long would you say it took for that to reach the right levels where you were a little bit feeling better or well enough that you
So
were off the air?
so fluid wise, they took the catheter out. I mean, they took the chest tubes out probably 2 days before I went upstairs. So now I don't know if I mentioned this already, but my first transplant, I from first day of hospitalization to day of home, it was 18 days. This one was 16 days. So I shortened it by 2 days. I literally went upstairs on day 14 because I did day 14. I went up about 1 o'clock, and then I did day 15 and I came home on day 16. So I want to say the chest tubes came out on day 12 and 13. They took two of them out on day 12 and then the other two on day 13. But they left them in as just to be safe. They wanted to make sure that there was nothing else coming in. I mean, draining. But for a few days, I want to say for at least, I'm telling you, they took them out day 12 and day 13. Probably day 10 and 11, there wasn't really much drainage. So, they were happy, but they wanted to just play safe. So I had to remain in the CTICU because of that, which, was a little bit depressing. But once I got upstairs, everything moved a lot faster. By this point, I'd already had two biopsies, and, one of them was great. And the other one, there was a little bit of rejection, but it was expected so now if you hold your fist, you make a fist, that's the size of your heart. So now my heart is the size of my fist, but the heart I have is probably almost double the size. My heart came from somebody who was a gentleman who I I overheard a conversation or something like that. But my heart came from a gentleman who was way bigger than me, probably twice my size. Now, mind you, I'm telling you about 260. So you're talking about somebody 450. So there's the big heart, which is why it was protruding into the lung space and collapsing to one lung. So now the rejection that I was having wasn't bad rejection. It was good rejection. It was cellular rejection, but it was because of the inflammation at the bottom of the heart and stuff like that. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, when they called me, they told me I needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible because there was a time crunch. Like they needed, if I couldn't be there in a certain amount of time, they had to send the heart to somebody else because the heart was already almost expired, like too late. So, and I got lucky because as I mentioned, being a status 4, I should have never gotten this phone call. But what happened was the heart, there was no, the heart, when it went through all of the people that were matched, one of the good things I like about my hospital is that it passed it passed with however many people for whatever reason, which I don't know because of HIPAA law and stuff like that. But when they released it to local hospitals, the plus side for me is that my hospital, Westchester Medical Center, always keeps a cardiac team on call. There's always a cardiac team in the hospital 24 hours a day. The other hospitals didn't have one. They don't. So when this heart came available, popped up in the system, my surgeon and my cardiologist both looked at the heart together and the information on it and said, you know what? This heart is a perfect match. I like it. I like it. It's his. So they took it. Then they called me and they told me they had it. And again, it was kind of like the first time it was caught me off guard. So there was no time to think or anything like that. So I was just like, yeah, I want it. And that's when I shot home, took a shower, stuff like that, shot down there. So now we're at this point to where I'm in recovery in the ICU. And, thank God I did because look at me. Now I'm home. But we, we took it day by day and slowly. And each day something else came off. But again, like I said, the oxygen, my breathing was the problem is because when they took me off oxygen, my saturation was like 80 and it would bounce between 80 and 88, which is not normal. A normal person, they say 90 to 95 is okay, but anything lower than that is dangerous. So mine when they took me off the oxygen, it kept dropping too low. So I had to use that little thing that they give you when you go in for surgery, the census spirometer. You have to blow into it well, the one I had, the first one I ever had, you blew into it. This one you had to inhale to keep the ball up. And then you had to, he wanted me every day to go higher and higher and higher. And I think the highest I got was like 3,500. But by that point, I was already able to breathe on my own. But for the remainder of the time down there, it it bounced. They took me off the oxygen. I didn't do too well. Well, I mean, I thought I was doing well, but the level dropped. So then they put me on just a regular nasal cannula. But they were watching me, and the doctors didn't like that it was still dipping. So then they put me on CPAP, high flow, which is annoying. And I mean, it worked because after wearing that for 2 days, I went back to the regular nasal cannula on 5 liters of oxygen or however they call it. And then after that, I went in for a biopsy on Wednesday, which was day 14. I came out of my biopsy. I went back to my room and I was in my room probably maybe 20 minutes when the nurse that was taking care of me that day was like, "You're leaving us. You're going upstairs to the recovery floor." And I was like, "Yes." Not that I don't like you and I don't want to be here with you, but this means I'm going home soon. So I figured another week before I went home because the first time when I came out of ICU, I was on the recovery floor for like a week, week and a half, something like that. But this time it was shorter. For me, I knew the medication. So like the first time around, I couldn't be released unless I knew every medication that I took, the name, the dosage, positive side effects, negative side effects. My nurse practitioner at the time wanted me to know 2 positive side effects and 3 negative for each medication. And I took a lot of medications. I take just as many now, except for I take insulin because of the steroids I take that causes my sugar to rise. But this time it wasn't like that. I didn't need to do that because I already know the medications. I've been on these medications before. I was on them for 2 years, and then some of them fell off, and now a lot of them are back, but they'll fall off as well. And then I'll just go back to the other ones. The only thing is now some of the dosages are higher. So I, with like one of the medications, I was on such a low dose for so long. Now I'm on such a high dose. I have tremors in my hands, my hands shake, stuff like that. But so now day 14, he tells me I'm going upstairs. About an hour later, I go upstairs and I got a private room with big windows and nice new bed that's not so rough looking, stuff like that. I spent the day with my wife. She was there with me when I went up. And then she had to go home and take care of the kids. And that was probably that night I slept in the chair, but I had a different, it was more relaxing. I was able to rest. I felt like it was just more peaceful. I can't explain it. So I got some pretty good rest that night. The nurses up there were pretty good. You know, I explained to them that listen, I'm not here to bother you. Don't don't expect me to call you because I got everything I need. I'm not gonna call you. I'm not gonna need nothing really, to be honest. Um, and it just I didn't know when I was gonna go home. And then the doctors came up, my nurse practitioners to take care of me, and one of the cardiologists from the cardiac team came up and they were like, "Listen, you're going home in a few days. We're thinking maybe Saturday. We'll see." And I said, "All right, whatever you say." To me, that was normally me being me. I would be pushy and stubborn. Oh, well, why can't I go home now and stuff like that? But they said Saturday. It was only a few days away, so I didn't. I just said, "Okay, it sounds good to me." I was able to being in this room. I was able to do more than I could before. I was able to get up and move around the room. See, downstairs, if I needed to use the bathroom, it was a year. Well, I had a catheter in pretty much until I came upstairs, with the exception of a day or so. And then if I needed to have a BM, I had to use a commode. So it was chair. I was only took a matter of 2 steps. I wasn't moving down there. I wasn't walking, except for when the physical therapist came, and that only happened like 2 or 3 times. So now I'm upstairs. I can actually walk to the bathroom, which is on the other side of the room, which for someone who's just had a heart transplant, it's pretty decent distance. But I don't need a nurse's assistance. I just unhook myself and go to the bathroom. And I'm like, all right, cool. So that's what I did. And for I had some visitors. My mom came down, stuff like that. My wife visited and stuff. And then Thursday, my nurse practitioner came in to go over. She came in with all my medicine that I was going to take home. She said, even though you have some of these at home, she said, I got you all new meds. We're going to just start fresh with these. I want you to put those to the side, and those you can use as extra if you need them. Anything that you're taking at home that you're not taking now, I need you to just bring to me, or, you know how to discard of it. And I said, okay. Usually I take it to the doctor and give it to a doctor, and then they discard it because it is medication. So we sit and we go over all my meds, and she has me sit down with her and we fill my pill case for the one, it's a 1 week pill case. I got to take meds 4 times a day. So we go through the whole pill case day by day. We fill it, and she watches me to make sure I put the right doses and stuff like that. After that, we go over, she gives me a list, and she says, regardless of what's on the bottle, you follow the list. This is how you're going to do this, this, and this. We also got you a scale because we want you. She gave me these papers and I put them into a folder, kind of like a binder type of folder, and it's a log. She wants me every day, daily, to log my weight, my temperature. So weight once a day, temperature 3 times a day, blood pressure 3 times a day, sugar 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. So I do. So I, she gives me the papers. I put them in the folder. We go over all of that. She explains to me how she wants that done, and I say, okay. So then she says to me, she says, well, based on your biopsy results from earlier this morning, yet earlier the other morning, everything looks great. There's no reason for us to keep you here. What we're going to do is this morning, well, there was some mild rejection, but again, it was nothing to really worry about. So what they did was they started me on some IV steroids that morning. So I did Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday. She said, I did Thursday and Friday. And she said, Saturday, you'll take them at home. And I said, at home? She said, yeah, you're going home Friday. And I
And
said,
that
oh,
is where we're going to leave us, because Clinton is going home on Saturday. Obviously, that we're talking about the story. He's home already. And what happens next in the next couple of days will shock all of you. To get a text message from Clinton letting me know that for some reason he's headed back to the hospital. For all of you out there, we thank you for listening, and we want to remind you that Endless Hope is all about finding a heart, believing that donors can actually extend lives, but more importantly, putting family first. On behalf of all of us here at Personal Testimonies and Endless Hope Inc. and Have Faith Let It Begin, we'll see you next Wednesday night, because something does happen that puts Clinton back in the hospital. Have a good night.
Thank you for listening to Personal Testimonies. Join us next Wednesday for part 4 with Clinton Knapp.
Hey, Have Faith family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends. Visit our website, havefaithletitbegin.com. We would love to hear your feedback.